We really like working with clients who want to meet their purpose, grow their purpose in anything where marketing can add to people's quality of life, or as we say, marketing for good.
Hello, Jo. Thank you so much for chatting to us today. I think we're all really looking forward to learning a bit more about what you do and how you do it, and hopefully answering some of the questions that people might have around research and how to approach it.
Thanks, Carolyn. So I'm going to take you through a little bit about research today. One of the things I really love about research is that there's so many things that our clients can discover through research to help them to achieve their goals, particularly in 2022, when lots changed. So lots to talk about.
Sounds great. Thanks, Jo. So we've had a few questions from our team, and also some common questions that we get asked from our clients. So I thought I would start by saying to you, what are the most common questions that you hear about research?
Yeah, so I think the reasons that people come to look for research are really, really varied. And I think, you know, the list of things that people are researching is endless. So some of them tend to be kind of your more standard scope of things. So they're interested in better understanding their customers, or not only who their customers are in terms of the demographics, but understanding their customers' behaviours and beliefs, so that they can make sure that their products and services are aligned, and to make sure that they're getting, I guess, the most out of their marketing, and making sure that all of those areas are focused. I think also we get lots of research and around understanding the understanding and the awareness and perceptions of their brand, and also their products and services as well, and also then evaluation of campaigns tends to be another big one, and that's really around both the effectiveness, but also the impact, and measuring that impact, and where they're seeing not only reach in terms of audience, but reach in terms of changes in awareness or recall of the messages that they're trying to communicate.
I imagine sometimes that might also be even measuring some changes of behaviour.
Yeah, it can be. And we've definitely done research along those lines, in terms of reported behaviour, looking at different groups and those who are aware of campaigns and those who aren't, or looking at change over years that campaigns have run. So that's all I guess the general things that you see coming through a lot in people looking for research. You also get really specific things. So particular programs of research that are around, I think, particularly in policy area. I know very, very early in my career, I was involved in some work on drug and alcohol use, and it was research undertaken in schools with school students. So it was a huge undertaking, but it was very, very specific around the things that they were measuring. And part of that is because of the stakeholders involved, not only I guess in a school setting, but also with vulnerable people. So I think the scope of research is really, really broad, and there's opportunity to answer almost any question, if you've got enough budget and enough time.
Love it.
So you know, there's lots of things. I think one of the ones that we've worked on recently that was really interesting was looking at barriers to people using particular products and services. So that's another one that is relevant to most businesses, looking at what are the barriers to people accessing their products.
Very topical at the moment, looking at some of the public health initiatives and really trying, I imagine some of those teams are looking at barriers as well to uptake of, for example, vaccination.
Yeah, that's right. And I think that there's a lot that goes into that research, and it's often a large scope. But there are lots of components to it. So even if you don't have the budget that you might have if you're looking at vaccine hesitancy, barriers to individual product or service use can start small. It can be speaking to people who you would identify as prospective clients about what's stopping them from taking that next step with your product. So I think the research can be really large scale, but it can also be more immediate than that, to get immediate insights into what's not quite working with a process or a service.
I can imagine for some clients that can sound a bit negative initially, to be thinking about barriers, but in fact what you're doing is you're almost taking down a hurdle.
Yeah, and I think that it gives you a good opportunity to then identify what your opportunities are, because until you understand what's stopping people from using your service, it's really hard to address that. So understanding what could be a barrier gives you the opportunity to be ahead of the rest of your market, and really make sure that your product can be available and relevant to as many people as possible.
That's great. Thanks, Jo. Very interesting. I think we could probably keep delving down that path for another 45 minutes. But another question, you mentioned there's a real breadth of types of research, and you outlined some, really good examples. But I'm imagining that there's also a real breadth of people and roles of people who actually come and ask for research. So if you had to categorize them, who are the people that come and ask for research, in whether that's by industry or job title or another way of looking at it?
So I think a lot of the people that I tend to work with and hear from, probably the largest number of them are people who have research or insights roles within their organizations, and that's definitely true of bigger organizations. But if I was to look through my emails at the contacts that I have there and the people that I'm dealing with, there's quite a range. Marketing managers, business advisors, presidents, CFOs, directors, particularly of small, medium sized organizations tend to be contacts. Project managers, customer service managers, product managers. They're all the types of people who have questions that research can answer. And I think that anything that they want to better understand or to measure can be addressed by research. And so we see, while your research and insight managers tend to be the people most research savvy and most confident in seeking out research, I think there's lots of other opportunities, and we see that with some of the other types of people that we have coming through.
Just curious, Jo, it sounds like you have so many, such a variety of people that you talk to and such different knowledge levels. Like, how do you translate when they tell you what they need? How do you kind of get from, somebody who has no knowledge in research at all and they have a goal? How do you what's your path to hearing them out and then actioning that?
Yeah, I think that with research, communication is really important throughout, at that initial stage, but also throughout the process. And it sometimes sounds a little bit cliched, but trying to work as a partner for your clients and also with your suppliers, so that there's that open dialogue throughout, about where you can go next and what are the implications of decisions. And at the really initial stage, I think the key is to asking a lot of questions, because the better I understand what somebody's looking for, the better I can design a program of research that's going to meet those needs. But I think also recognizing that not everybody knows a lot about research, and what the benefits and the limitations of the research might be. So being prepared to explain all of that as we go. And I don't like to kind of say hand-holding too much, because it's it's something that can be seen negatively. But I think in a research process, it's actually a really positive one, because you do research every day. There's certain things that you understand in terms of approach or implications or all of those things that I know because it's my job and I do it every day. And I think that's just a normal thing to know, right? But recognizing that the people that I'm dealing with often don't come from a research background. So being happy to talk them through what our recommendations are in terms of approach, or talking them through what it means to have a bigger sample size versus smaller sample size, and all the things that go with that around reliability and margin of error, and all of those things. It's a really important step, and it can take a lot of time in the lead-in, but it means that when it comes to talking about the results and the recommendations going forward, they have a much better understanding about the context of those results as well. So I think that it's really important to spend that time up front, because that's why they're coming to us, because they don't necessarily have the capacity or the knowledge or the resources to do these things themselves. If that makes sense a little.
I think that makes a lot of sense, Jo, and it's really interesting, I think. Sorry, naughty dog. It's really interesting, I think, sometimes too, as part of that iterative process with clients, the more the conversation goes and the clients share, perhaps something that they might not have thought particularly important, perhaps that's something that adds to the mix and changes slightly what you might recommend, or
and
opens new opportunities.
Yeah, it's a good point, because while I say that research is the thing that I do every day, they're the ones doing their business every day. So the more questions that I can ask and get that better understanding, even of those things that they don't necessarily think, that they just like, oh, that's the thing I do every day, it's not something that's important. It's really getting that understanding of their businesses as much as we can, and that's, I guess, part of the thing that's really nice about the clients that we have, that we do ongoing research with, because with every project we're learning a bit more about their business while we're helping them to understand their business.
That's a nice way to think about it. So just, I suppose, taking the next step from there, once you've had developed that depth of understanding of what a particular client might be after, and a little more about their organisation, how, when you're thinking about the work that Leapfrog Research does, how do you decide the most effective approach?
Yeah, so I think it's really a case-by-case basis, and I think that because all of the research that we do is customised to the client's needs, that understanding is really important. But once we kind of we're at that point, we feel that we have a good, or I guess adequate understanding of the client's business to kind of start thinking about the next steps. Really, I think the thing to think about is what we're trying to achieve with the research. So are we looking to understand something better, or are we looking to measure something? Who are the audience that we want to speak to? How accessible is that target market that we want to speak with? What are the timing constraints do the results need to be delivered to make a decision, and what kind of timing goes around that? What's the budget, and what will that budget allow us to do in order to best answer those research aims? And I think as well, it's really important to think about what the research will be used for, because that can also have an impact on what will be important when designing the research. So something that is going to be used to make a decision that will change the way the change of direction of a business. Obviously, you want to be much more confident in those results than you do necessarily in some other piece of research that's important but not as integral, I guess, to the way the business looks to the future. So I think those decisions, understanding what research will be used for is important when you're thinking about how you design that research as well.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
What about sorry.
No, I was going to say just kind of bringing all of that together and understanding those points allows you to kind of think about a solution that's going to fit that particular client for this research need.
Yeah. So how, sometimes people will come with quite a fixed idea about the methodology, the research methodology. So they might come to Leapfrog and say, we're after a survey, or we'd like to do some in-depth interviews, or whatever, or we want to do focus groups, for example.
Yeah.
What are the watch outs if people are coming with quite a clear idea of methodology?
Yeah, I don't think that that's necessarily a problem, but I don't think that means that we shouldn't do that planning work in the beginning. So we still need to understand all of those things that we would need to understand if they had no idea what kind of research they wanted. Because I think with research, there's often lots of ways to approach the same questions. And it's not necessarily that one way is better than another, but certain things will answer certain needs better than others. And all of those things play into that. But I think if they have a particular way that they want to approach the research, and we're satisfied that it's going to meet all of those research needs that I mentioned in terms of answering their questions and providing them with the most reliable data that we can for the budget that they have and the time constraints and their audience, and being able to access those audiences. I don't think that there's a problem with accommodating particular approaches if we're satisfied that will work for the project. And I think we've had some good examples of this. There was earlier last year, there was a project that we did in a regional town of New South Wales, where the client was particularly interested in a particular approach, which may not have necessarily been the approach that we would have recommended without their strong interest in doing it that way. So I think there was an opportunity for us to listen to our clients' reasoning and what they were looking for, but also to do independently of that, do our own research in that particular area to understand how we were best going to access the respondents that we wanted to. While we've done lots of work in regional areas before, it wasn't a regional area that we'd particularly worked in before. So understanding how best to access those people in that area was important. And I think that listening to the clients on this occasion was really important because they were members of that community, and had a really good understanding of how that people in that community lived and worked, and how we could access those people. So I think that while it can be dangerous to blindly follow whatever it is that your clients want, I think it's also really important to listen to them, because often they have a lot of knowledge about their target audiences and how to speak to them. But I think we also bring a lot of expertise, so we want to make sure that those decisions are the right ones. And I think that again, working in that partnership means that we both get to bring our strengths to the table when we're designing the research and how it proceeds.
I think that's a great example of, why our, one of our fundamental values is around collaboration, for both Leapfrog Research and for Juntos Marketing, that bringing the knowledge and expertise from the client as well as from our side. So another question that we've had quite often asked, Jo, is how often should you do research?
I think you should do research constantly. And in an ideal world, everyone would have endless budget, and we just research. We just have research ongoing for everybody all of the time. But realistically, I think there are very few businesses who have the luxury of being able to just have an ongoing program of research. So I think that really it comes down to priorities for the business. I think that the research that you're doing needs to make the best use of your budget. So by prioritizing what those questions are for your business will help determine how often you should be doing research. And your budget will also determine how often you should be doing research, because it needs to be sustainable. I think there's a lot of benefit in tracking surveys. So while they can be reasonably small surveys that are conducted quarterly or monthly or every 6 months or every year, the benefit of tracking surveys is that you can build on knowledge over time. So while you may only have a few hundred completes each time you run your research, if you're doing that every 6 months or every year, it actually gives you quite a decent sized data set, and gives you the ability to look at the impacts of the work that you're doing, and also to look at changes over time. It's really easy to forget about what was happening a year or 2 years ago. So being able to look at those time series data sets is a really important tool to kind of see how the business has changed and progressed over time. So I think for me, if budget allows, and if your priorities allow, I think those ongoing studies, even if they're not constant, but regularly done, in some ways give the most bang for your buck.
That's really interesting to hear.
I have a question around accessibility and how do you get people to take the surveys? If you have an audience that's not particularly they don't chat back often, or they're not really engaged, and you're trying to do research to get them engaged, what kind of incentives can you give if you have budget for it, or what have you seen in the past where people are eager to take surveys or made eager?
Yeah, so I think research has changed a little bit over the years, and it now relies, where many years ago, there was a lot more, you had your randoms, your more random surveys. So none of them were particularly, they all, anyway, limitations of research. They had more scope to talk to people who weren't necessarily interested in research. So there's things like, somebody coming to your door and asking you to do a survey, or somebody calling your home phone and asking you to do a survey. That's changed over time, and there are lots of reasons that has changed. People are, I think, a lot busier, so they're less likely to agree to do those things. Also, you have limitations of phone surveys where, many households don't have landlines anymore. It's just mobile phones. Even my dad, who's in his mid-70s, doesn't have a landline anymore. He got rid of it. He never used it. He just uses his mobile phone. And that's increasingly more the case, particularly in younger age groups. That is proof that it's true. It's true of the population, I think, as a whole. I think as well, increasingly, you have people who in cities live in apartments who aren't accessible to people knocking on their door because they need a security code to get into the building and things like that. So the way we live has changed, and that's made it harder to access people who aren't interested in research. So more and more research relies on people who have opted in for research panels, either online, and online is definitely probably broadest scope of those, with the ability to look for particular people that you're interested in talking to, but it's not exclusively the way that it's done. You'll still see that there's people in shopping centres who will ask you questions, and there's still there will still be people who are encouraged through networks to take part in research, particularly qualitative research interviews are often recruited through snowballing. So people who are part of a target group will be encouraged to reach out to other people in their network to take part in research. So I think in terms of how you approach people and get people to take part, it's again understanding that audience and how to best target that audience. So if you're using people that are part of a panel or a list, often the group that they are part of will include incentives. So for a certain length survey that they complete, they will get so many credits into their account, and then they can redeem those for rewards. When you're recruiting for in-depth interviews or focus groups, there's generally a cash payment that's made to compensate people for their time. So there's lots of different things. There's often, in less structured panels or groups of people, you often see things. So for example, if you have a client list that you wanted to go out to, you might encourage people to take part by offering a prize draw, something along those lines. So there are lots of ways to encourage people to take part in research. Some of them are more successful than others, again, depending on the target group. The harder people are to find, the more you have to pay to get them. There are also other things that you can do to encourage people to take part. So things like keeping surveys short. People are much more likely to do a 5-minute survey than they are to do a 50-minute survey, unless they're being rewarded extremely well. So there are lots of things. I think also, as we do more and more online research in place of things that may have been done by telephone or in person previously, particularly in the last couple of years, the more interesting you can make a survey as well, the more likely people are to complete the whole survey rather than dropping out partway through. And so you see, particular effort put into the way surveys are presented, the way that questions are presented. So rather than having big grids of lots of statements or brands or things, keeping things easy to answer so that they can be answered on a mobile phone rather than having to sit down at a PC. They're all really important aspects in terms of how you keep people engaged. But accessing people is still, can be, for particular groups, can still be one of the challenges of completing research. If you've got any good ideas, let me know.
I guess that like leads really well into the next question around budgets and
Mhm.
you know, what would you say is the minimum budget to do, you know, base research, basic, and then what would you say is like, I mean, you can't really cap it. You said you have a massive amount of money, but if you wanted to do a large chunk of research
Mhm.
for a large client, you know, what would be the minimum and the maximum that you would say we're talking?
Yeah, so I think really there is research that can be done at any price point. It's really around how we best spend that money. So if you have $5,000, there's research for you. If you have 20, 40, 60, 160, like there's research for you. It's about using that money to get the best results that we can. So I think in research there's lots of trade-offs. When you're designing research, you need to be conscious of time, of budget, and of quality. And if you have limited amounts of any of those, you run into problems. It means that you have to trade off something else. You know, if you have a really hard to reach target audience, you can do it, but it's going to take a lot of time and it's going to take a lot of budget to get good quality. You can do it cheap and fast, but it's not going to be good quality research. And so I think that those three things really interact. And I'm not saying that you can't do quality research at that lower end of that $5,000 mark. But you need to consider how you're going to get the best quality you can for that budget. And it might mean that it takes longer, or it might mean that you focus on one really important question rather than covering 5 things in your research. I guess it again comes back to that customizing the research to all of those things, so including the budget and including what are the important things that feed into the research, but also that you want to get out of the research. Because there's no point in spending that $5,000 unless you're going to get something useful. You're better off doing your research every second year and spending $10,000 on it and getting something useful, if that makes sense.
I have a question. When it comes to designing surveys or discussion guides,
Mhm.
does it happen that a client wants to fit too much information?
Yes.
Too many questions, because I can just imagine myself, I would be thinking, oh, this is my one shot to get to know everything there is. Do you have any experience in that, and how do you manage that?
Yeah, so I think that firstly, you need to communicate that. So you need to be really, really clear about the importance of sticking to the right questionnaire or discussion guide link in terms of engaging people, and also making sure that they're adequately compensated for their time for completing your survey or doing your interview. And I think that it's really important to cover those things up front when you're designing the research, because no client wants to have you come back later on and say, actually our survey is twice as long as it's meant to be, so it's going to cost us twice as much to get this into field. You know, like it's not a good place to be. So I think that, you know, yes, clients will always want to have every question that that's come up in the last 2 months before they've come to you with their research included in their research, because they want answers to all of this stuff, and they want to learn as much about these people as they can while they have them and while they're doing their survey. So I think it by communicating kind of why it's important to keep people engaged and keep people in the survey is really important. The other thing that you find with things that are too long is that respondents get fatigued. And so if you have a long survey, then what you get at the end of the survey is a bit of rubbish anyway, because they're just trying to get through the end of the survey. So keeping things as short and sweet as possible is really important. In terms of managing that, if I feel that things are a bit long, I like to try and get priorities from the client around what are the must-haves, what are nice if we've got the time and we can keep them in, and what are the things that would be really lovely to have, but realistically they can wait till next time. Or we can have a different approach for them, you know, like if it's just something that's of a bit of interest, maybe we can have a look at some desk research and see if there's other research that's been done that's quite similar to the information that they're looking for. You know, it's not necessarily going to be specific to their service, but there might be something that's done in that area that will give them some good pointers. You know, there are always different approaches that we can employ to make the most of budget. So then once we have our priorities and we've written our discussion guide, there's a few things from there. So I think there's a few little calculation tools that I like to use for questionnaires that give me a rough idea of how long a questionnaire will be based on what percentage of the target respondents are likely to answer each question and what type of question it is, whether it's an open-ended question where they need to type something in, if it's a grid question where they've got to make a decision about a number of different brands, or if it's just a straightforward pick something from the code frame kind of list. So that tends to give a good indication about how long something is. And then from there, once we're kind of happy that it's pretty close to the right length, we will usually, when we go into field, we'll do a soft launch. So we'll get about around 10% of responses. So, you know, often that's around 30 completes through a questionnaire. And that gives us a pretty good indication about how long the survey is running once people are actually into the survey and having to think about answers to those questions. Because sometimes when we're designing questionnaires, we're so close to the questions and what it is that we want to get out of it that it's hard to think about, well, actually someone's going to have to stop for 2 minutes and think about how they're going to answer this question or those types of things. So that soft launch gives us a bit of real life data and in terms of understanding questionnaire length and making sure that we're happy that it's where it should be. And it's much easier at that point to negotiate, well, actually we need to take that nice to have question out this time because we're tracking at 17 minutes when we should be tracking at 15 minutes, or you know, we're tracking it at 6.5 minutes on our 5-minute questionnaire or those types of things. And you know, at that stage those questions are written and can be filed away for next time there's research. If we've got a bit of space, we can pop them in.
That's really interesting, Jo. Thanks for that. I know we've only got a couple of minutes left, but I was just going to ask you, a couple of times we've made mention of vulnerable groups or hard to reach groups, and one of the trends that we've identified, through a lot of our work is a real growing interest in diversity and understanding more than just the middle of the road type people, and really getting a fair and accurate representation of some of those groups of people who perhaps most need or most want a service or product, but are hard to get to for lots of reasons. Have you got any comments about getting to a true diverse representation and better representation in research?
Yeah, I think it's important, and it's something that we're, I guess, increasingly recognizing as researchers. We have a really great research society who runs lots of courses and things so that we can learn about ways to increase diversity in our research. And, of those things that I've been part of, I think the most important thing that I've learned is that we need to ask the question. Because if we don't ask those questions, we don't know who we've got in our research. And so I think that's a really important first step, to understand who makes up the research that we're already collecting, because that gives us the opportunity to think about if there are groups that we're missing from our research, and how we might best access those groups. But I think at the moment there's still a little bit of a lack of awareness about who's actually in our research and who's missing from our research. So I think that's something that we're slowly changing. We're changing the ways that we ask gender questions. We're changing the way that we ask questions around disability and people who identify as having a disability, those who access services and those versus those who don't. There's still not a lot being asked in research around, I guess, diversity of background. And I'm not sure if that's, the next place we'll go. And, definitely, I think for me, a really important one, because it means that we and our clients are potentially missing out on things that are important for whole groups of people. So I think that's something that we do need to focus on as part of our research. But it's a tough one, and I think, talking about the limitations of our research, it comes back to that question of how many questions can we get into this 10-minute survey or this 5-minute survey, and how we're going to prioritize those. So I think the benefit of having those questions in our surveys as part of our demographics is really, really strong, because it helps us and helps our clients to identify what they don't know. That makes sense.
Yeah, definitely.
But it can be a hard sell to get those questions in. If our demographics questions are going to take 2 minutes of our survey, that we're spending 2 minutes at the beginning screening to make sure that we're getting the right target audience, it then means that we've got 6 minutes of our 10-minute questionnaire to actually get into the nitty-gritty of what it is that we want to know. But I think without those things, our research isn't as good quality as it could otherwise be.
Yeah.
So yeah,
you're
I
asking
guess
the right questions to the wrong people.
Yeah, exactly right. So it's that trade-off of quality and time and budget.
I love that triangle. I can
Yeah,
really see that.
It's a really powerful thing. And when you need to make decisions in research, it's important to think about how each of those things are impacted.
Mm. Jo, you're an absolute wealth of knowledge. It is fantastic to have you as part of the Leapfrog Research team. And it's also fantastic to have you as part of Juntos Marketing's team. Thank you for being so generous with your wealth of information and knowledge and experience. It's been fantastic for me, and I'm sure the others feel the same.
Yeah, and you were very nice to me. You didn't even give me any super difficult questions I couldn't answer.
Next time, Jo.
All right.
Thank you so much for listening to our very first episode of the Marketing for Good podcast. If you had any questions about undertaking research, budgets, or what kind of research is right for your organization, we hope we answered them. And if you find we missed something, drop us a line. Leapfrog Research is our very own research branch at Juntos Marketing. Our research is often what fuels the strategy behind and content created within our award-winning campaigns. Are you looking to start 2022 off with a bang? Research or a brand, campaign, or content refresh could be your answer. Let's chat. We would be happy to help you and your organization grow your purpose and start your journey towards marketing for good.